The deafening whistle of the approaching train rattled through Oakridge like a thunderclap on that sweltering July afternoon in 1885. But Samuel Winters hardly noticed it. 7 years had passed since that fateful day when Olivia Campbell had been dragged away by her furious father and brothers, their promises to one another dissolving into the dust kicked up by their departing wagon. Samuel had been just 22 then, a cowhand with ambitions of his own ranch someday, but little else to offer a merchant's daughter. Now at 29, with calloused hands and weathered skin that spoke of years under the unforgiving western sun, he stood on the platform only by chance, having come to town for supplies. "Train's running late again," grumbled old Pete Henderson beside him, tapping his pocket watch with annoyance. "Been that way since they extended the line to Santa Fe." Samuel nodded absently, adjusting his hat against the glare of the setting sun. The platform was crowded with the usual assortment of townspeople, travelers, and ranch hands. None of them knew that this very spot was where he'd made his last desperate plea to Olivia, begging her not to board that eastbound train, promising things he had no way of delivering. "Some fine-looking folks coming in from back east," Pete continued, squinting at the approaching locomotive. "Heard tell the new schoolteacher might be among them." The massive iron beast finally rolled to a stop with a great hissing of steam, its black smoke billowing up into the clear blue sky. Samuel moved to the side, intending to let the passengers disembark before he collected the package he was waiting for. The first passengers stepped down a middle-aged couple, a traveling salesman by the look of his sample case. Two young men in suits too fine for the dusty streets of Oakridge. Samuel glanced at them without interest, his mind already on the ride back to the Double Creek Ranch, where he now served as foreman. And then he saw her. A woman in a fine blue traveling dress stepped down from the second car, her gloved hand accepting assistance from the porter. Her auburn hair was pinned beneath a modest hat, but several curls had escaped to frame a face that struck Samuel like a physical blow to the chest. "Olivia," he whispered, the name feeling both foreign and painfully familiar on his lips. She looked different, more refined, more mature, but unmistakably Olivia Campbell. She stood on the platform, surveying the town with an appraising gaze that suggested she was taking inventory of what had changed and what remained the same. When her eyes landed on Samuel, they widened with recognition. For a moment, the platform, the town, the very world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them caught in a moment outside of time. 7 years of pain, of wondering, of trying to forget all of it crashed over Samuel in a single heartbeat. Olivia's lips parted slightly, as if she too were struggling to process the reality of their unexpected encounter. Then, with a composure that seemed to require visible effort, she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning to speak to a porter about her luggage. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," Pete said, nudging Samuel's arm. "You all right?" Samuel couldn't answer. His throat had gone dry, his heart hammering against his ribs like a wild thing trying to escape. Olivia Campbell was back in Oakridge, and nothing would ever be the same again. "I know her," Samuel finally managed, his voice rough. "She used to live here, before." "Pretty thing," Pete observed. "Seems like the kind that belongs in a big city parlor, not out here in our little town." Samuel couldn't disagree. Olivia had always seemed meant for finer things: education, culture, society, all the things her father had insisted she deserved, and that Samuel couldn't provide. That's why Harold Campbell had been so determined to separate them, whisking his daughter away to Boston to live with relatives after catching the young couple in a passionate embrace behind the mercantile. Now she was back, standing not 30 feet away, and Samuel had no idea what to do about it. Miss Campbell, a middle-aged man in a tweed suit, approached Olivia. "I'm Mayor Donovan. Welcome to Oakridge, or should I say welcome back." "Thank you, Mayor," Olivia replied, her voice carrying across the platform. "It's been a long time. Your telegram said you were accepting our teaching position. We're mighty pleased about that. The children need a proper education." Samuel felt a fresh wave of surprise. Olivia, a teacher. The girl he'd known had dreamed of adventure, of seeing the world beyond Oakridge's dusty streets. She'd read him poetry under the cottonwood trees by the creek, her eyes bright with dreams of distant places. "I'm looking forward to beginning my duties," Olivia said to the mayor, her voice carrying a refinement that hadn't been there before. "I trust the schoolhouse has been prepared." "Indeed it has, though it's nothing fancy. Mrs. Donovan has prepared a room for you at our home until more permanent arrangements can be made." Olivia nodded her thanks, then paused as the porter brought forward her trunks. Samuel noticed there were several heavy, expensive-looking things that spoke of a life far removed from Oakridge. Before he realized what he was doing, Samuel had crossed the platform and stood before her. "Miss Campbell," he said, removing his hat, "welcome back to Oakridge." Her eyes met his, and for an instant, Samuel could see the girl she had been, passionate, defiant, and so very alive behind the composed woman who stood before him. "Mr. Winters," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "How unexpected to see you still in town." "I work at the Double Creek now, foreman." He didn't know why he felt compelled to tell her this, except perhaps to show that he'd made something of himself in her absence. "Congratulations." Her tone was polite, distant. "That's quite an accomplishment." Mayor Donovan glanced between them with interest. "You two are already acquainted, I take it?" "We were familiar with one another before I left for Boston," Olivia replied carefully. Samuel noticed how she avoided mentioning that they had been planning to elope the very night her father had discovered them, how they had whispered promises of eternal love and devotion, how they had given themselves to each other in the hayloft of Jenkins' stable, believing that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. "Miss Campbell's father was our town's most successful merchant," Samuel explained to the mayor, keeping his tone casual despite the turmoil inside him. "Before they relocated. Well, we're certainly glad to have a Campbell back in Oakridge," the mayor said jovially. "The school's been without a proper teacher since Miss Havisham retired last spring." A sudden commotion near the train drew their attention. A porter was struggling with one of Olivia's trunks, losing his grip as he attempted to lower it to the platform. Samuel moved quickly, catching the heavy trunk before it could crash to the ground. "Thank you," Olivia said, genuine gratitude breaking through her composed facade. "That contains books, rather valuable ones." "Still a reader, I see," Samuel commented, allowing a hint of familiarity into his voice. For a moment, her expression softened. "Some things don't change, Mr. Winters." But many things had, Samuel thought as he helped secure her luggage on the mayor's wagon. The Olivia he remembered had worn simple cotton dresses and laughed freely under the open sky. This woman moved with practiced grace, her speech and mannerisms refined in ways that spoke of finishing schools and society parlors. "Well, we should get you settled," Mayor Donovan said, offering Olivia his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. "School term starts in just 2 weeks, and there's much to prepare." "Of course," Olivia agreed, arranging her skirts as she took her seat. She looked down at Samuel, who still stood beside the wagon. "It was good to see you again, Mr. Winters." "Likewise, Miss Campbell." Samuel stepped back, placing his hat back on his head. "I expect we'll be seeing more of each other now that you're back in Oakridge." Something flashed in her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or caution. Perhaps. Good day to you. As the wagon pulled away, Samuel remained standing in the street, watching until it disappeared around the corner toward the mayor's house on the north side of town. His package from back east, a new bridal bit he'd saved months to order, lay forgotten on the platform. "That's quite a reunion," Pete said, appearing at Samuel's elbow. "Former sweethearts, were you?" Samuel didn't answer immediately, his eyes still fixed on the empty street where Olivia had disappeared. "Something like that," he finally said. "Well, son, I'd say life's about to get a whole lot more interesting in Oakridge." Pete clapped him on the shoulder before wandering off toward the saloon. Samuel couldn't have agreed more, though interesting hardly captured the storm of emotions roiling within him. Olivia Campbell was back in Oakridge, and with her return came all the memories, all the pain, and all the unanswered questions he'd spent 7 years trying to bury. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street as Samuel finally collected his package and mounted his horse for the ride back to Double Creek. The familiar landscape of rolling hills and distant mountains seemed suddenly altered, as if Olivia's return had changed not just his inner world but the physical one around him. 7 years ago, he'd been a love-struck young cowhand with nothing to his name but dreams. Now he was foreman of one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, respected by the men who worked under him and trusted by Theodore Douglas, the ranch's owner. He had built a life for himself, a good life, a meaningful one in the wake of Olivia's departure. And yet, seeing her again had shaken something loose inside him, something he'd thought long buried. As he urged his horse into a trot, Samuel couldn't help wondering what had brought Olivia Campbell back to Oakridge after all this time, and what her return would mean for the careful life he had constructed in her absence. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of early autumn day that made the Wyoming territory feel like heaven on earth. Samuel rose before the sun as always, his responsibilities at Double Creek demanding his early attention. Yet as he went about his duties, checking on the new calves, organizing the day's work for the ranch hands, consulting with Mr. Douglas about an upcoming cattle drive, his thoughts continually drifted back to Olivia. What had happened to her in Boston? Had she married? The absence of a wedding ring had been the first thing he'd noticed, though he cursed himself for looking. And why return to Oakridge of all places? The town had grown in her absence, but it was still a far cry from the sophisticated eastern cities where she'd spent the last 7 years. By mid-morning, Samuel had made up his mind. He needed supplies from town anyway, at least. That's what he told himself as he saddled his horse and informed the ranch hands he'd be gone for a few hours. "Need anything while I'm there?" He asked Diego, the seasoned cowhand who served as his right hand at the ranch. Diego gave him a knowing look. "Heard Miss Campbell's back in town. That wouldn't have anything to do with this sudden need for supplies, would it?" Samuel frowned. "News travels fast. Always does. Especially when it involves the prettiest girl Oakridge ever produced and the man who nearly eloped with her." "That was a long time ago," Samuel said firmly, adjusting his saddle cinch with more force than necessary. "If you say so, Chief." Diego's smile suggested he believed otherwise. "Just don't forget the tobacco for the bunkhouse while you're busy not thinking about her." Samuel rolled his eyes but promised to remember. The ride to town gave him too much time with his thoughts, memories of Olivia surfacing with painful clarity. The way she'd read poetry to him, her voice soft and expressive. How she'd stood up to her father that final night, declaring she'd rather live in a shack with Samuel than in a mansion without him. The promises they'd made under a blanket of stars, believing that nothing could tear them apart. but Harold Campbell had proven them wrong. He'd caught them before they could elope, locked Olivia in her room, and made arrangements to send her east the very next day. Samuel had tried to see her, had even attempted to break into the Campbell home, only to be beaten bloody by her brothers and threatened with arrest if he came near their sister again. The train had departed the following morning, taking Olivia away from Oakridge and from him. The only message he'd received was a tear-stained note smuggled to him by the sympathetic daughter of the Campbell family's cook. "They're sending me to Aunt Margaret in Boston. Father says I'll thank him someday. I'll never stop loving you. Wait for me." He had waited. For months, he'd waited for letters that never came, for word that she was returning. Eventually, news filtered back to Oakridge that the Campbells had permanently relocated to Boston, their dry goods business in Wyoming sold to a competitor. Life had moved on, as it inevitably did, and Samuel had been forced to move with it. Now, as he rode into town, Samuel wondered if Olivia had written letters that were intercepted, or if Boston society had simply made her forget her promises to a penniless cowhand. It hardly mattered now. 7 years had passed. They were different people. Oakridge had grown considerably since the railroad had come through. What had once been little more than a dusty main street with a handful of businesses now boasted 2 hotels, a proper bank building, and even a small opera house that occasionally hosted traveling shows. Samuel tied his horse at the hitching post outside Jacob's General Store, taking a moment to straighten his vest and dust off his clothes before entering. "Morning, Sarah," he greeted the proprietor's daughter, who stood behind the counter. "Need some supplies for the ranch." "Good morning, Mr. Winters," Sarah replied with a smile that lingered a bit too long. It was no secret in town that the 20-year-old harbored feelings for the Double Creek foreman, something Samuel pretended not to notice. "What can I get for you today?" Samuel handed over his list, deliberately avoiding any mention of the schoolhouse or the new teacher. Sarah, however, had no such reservations. "Have you heard? Olivia Campbell's back in town," she said as she gathered the items on his list. "Going to be our new school teacher. Can you imagine? After all that education back east, coming back to teach in Little Oakridge." "I saw her arrive yesterday," Samuel admitted, keeping his tone neutral. Sarah's eyes widened with interest. "Did you speak with her? Everyone's wondering why she's come back." "Her father was so determined to get her away from here from you, if the stories are true." Samuel winced internally at the reminder that his failed romance with Olivia had been fodder for town gossip for years. "We exchanged greetings, that's all." "Well, she's staying with the Donovans for now, but I heard she's looking to rent the old Miller cottage on the edge of town. She was in here earlier, buying some writing paper and asking about where to purchase household items." Samuel's heart quickened at this news. The Miller cottage was a small but charming house that had stood empty since old Mrs. Miller had passed away the previous winter. It was set apart from the main town, nestled among a stand of cottonwood trees near the creek coincidentally, not far from where he and Olivia had often met in secret all those years ago. "That's so?" he asked, striving for casual interest. "Sounds like she's planning to stay a while." "The school board offered her a year's contract, with option to renew," Sarah confirmed, adding a sack of coffee beans to his order. "Papa says it's quite a coup for Oakridge, getting a Boston-educated teacher. Though some folks are wondering if there's more to her return than just the teaching position." Samuel felt a flash of irritation at the town's incessant gossip. "I imagine Miss Campbell has her reasons and they're her business alone." Sarah looked slightly chastened. "Of course. I didn't mean anything by it." She finished gathering his supplies and tallied the cost. "That'll be $3.45. As Samuel counted out the money, the bell above the door chimed. He turned, an instinctive movement, and found himself looking directly at Olivia as she stepped into the store. She wore a simpler dress than yesterday's traveling outfit, though still finer than most women in Oakridge could afford. A deep green that complemented her auburn hair, which today was braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. For a moment, she froze, clearly not expecting to encounter him. Then, composing herself, she nodded in acknowledgement. "Mr. Winters, good morning, Miss Campbell," he replied, tipping his hat. "Getting settled in town, I hear." "Yes, everyone has been very welcoming." She moved further into the store, removing her gloves. "Mayor Donovan showed me the schoolhouse this morning. It needs some attention, but it has potential." "Olivia Campbell," Sarah exclaimed, coming around the counter to greet her. "I'm Sarah Jacobs. You probably don't remember me. I was just a child when you left, but my father owns this store." "Of course I remember you, Sarah," Olivia said warmly. "Though you've certainly grown up, your father's store was always my favorite place in town." Samuel gathered his purchases, aware that he should leave but reluctant to do so. Olivia's presence seemed to fill the small store, making it hard to focus on anything else. "I was hoping to purchase some fabric," Olivia was saying to Sarah. "I need curtains for the cottage I'm renting, and perhaps some material for a new dress or two. The Miller place, right?" Sarah asked eagerly. "It's such a sweet little house. Needs some fixing up, but the location is lovely." "Yes, by the creek. I remember it from." Olivia paused, her eyes briefly meeting Samuel's before darting away. From before, Samuel knew exactly what she was remembering. The Miller property bordered the very spot where they had spent countless evenings together, where he had first told her he loved her, where they had planned their future. "I should be going," he said abruptly, gathering his packages. "Miss Campbell, good day. Sarah, thank you for the supplies." "Mr. Winters," Olivia called as he reached the door, surprising him. He turned, finding her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I understand you're foreman at Double Creek now." "That's right. My congratulations. I remember how much you wanted to make your mark in ranching." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It seems you've succeeded." The simple acknowledgement of their shared past, of the dreams he had confided in her, caught Samuel off guard. "Thank you," he managed. "And congratulations on your teaching position. The children of Oakridge will be fortunate to have you." Something softened in her expression. "That's kind of you to say." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words and memories. Sarah looked from one to the other with poorly concealed curiosity. "Well," Samuel finally said, "I should get these supplies back to the ranch." "Of course." Olivia nodded, her composure returning. "Good day, Mr. Winters." As Samuel stepped out into the sunlight, he felt as if he'd been holding his breath the entire time. Seeing Olivia in the familiar setting of Jacob's store had brought back a flood of memories, the two of them examining penny candy together. Olivia helping him select a book for his birthday. Stolen glances across the store when her father's back was turned. He was loading his supplies onto his horse when the store door opened again and Olivia emerged, a small package in her hands. She paused when she saw him still there, then seemed to make a decision, walking directly toward him. "Mr. Winters, Samuel," she said, her voice low enough that passers-by wouldn't overhear. "I realize we haven't had a proper opportunity to speak." Samuel's hands stilled on the saddle straps. "No, we haven't. I imagine you have questions about my return to Oakridge." "It's not my place to question your decisions, Miss Campbell," she sighed, a hint of frustration breaking through her composed exterior. "Please, when we're speaking privately, at least call me Olivia. We've known each other too long for such formality." The sound of her name in his own voice felt dangerous somehow. "Olivia, then." She glanced around, seeming to realize that the middle of Main Street wasn't the place for the conversation she wanted to have. "Would you? That is, might we speak somewhere more private, perhaps tomorrow evening?" "I'll be at the cottage by then." Samuel knew he should refuse. Nothing good could come from reopening old wounds, and yet the opportunity to finally get answers to the questions that had haunted him for 7 years was too powerful to resist. "I can come by after sundown," he said. "Around 7. Relief flickered across her face. "Thank you. I'll expect you then." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her back straight and her steps measured. Samuel watched her go, wondering what exactly he had just agreed to and whether he would regret it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of ranch work and distracted thoughts. Samuel found himself making uncharacteristic mistakes miscounting cattle, forgetting instructions he'd given to the hands, even saddling the wrong horse at one point. By evening, Diego was looking at him with undisguised concern. "Whatever business you have in town," the older man said as they sat outside the bunkhouse after dinner, "you'd better settle it soon. Never seen you this scattered." Samuel gave a rueful laugh. "That obvious, huh?" "Like a bull in a china shop." Diego lit his pipe, the smoke curling up into the darkening sky. "It's the Campbell woman now," Samuel corrected automatically, then grimaced at having revealed his thoughts so easily. Diego nodded sagely. "Some fires never quite go out, just burn down to embers waiting for a breeze to bring them back to life." "This one's been out for years," Samuel insisted, though he knew it for a lie even as he spoke the words. "If you say so." Diego puffed on his pipe. "Just remember people change." 7 years is a long time, especially for a young woman in a big city. "I know that. Do you? Because you've got the look of a man ready to pick up exactly where he left off, and that's dangerous territory." Samuel couldn't deny the truth in Diego's words. Part of him, a larger part than he cared to admit, wanted nothing more than to discover that Olivia had never stopped loving him, that circumstances beyond her control had kept them apart, that they could somehow recapture what they'd lost. But he wasn't that naive young cowhand anymore. Life had taught him hard lessons about dreams and reality. Whatever Olivia wanted to discuss tomorrow night, he would approach it with caution. "I appreciate the concern," Samuel told Diego, rising to his feet, "but I've got no illusions about rekindling old flames. Some things are better left in the past." Diego's knowing smile suggested he didn't believe a word of it, but he said nothing more as Samuel bid him good night and headed for his private quarters in the small cabin reserved for the ranch foreman. As he prepared for bed, Samuel found himself remembering the night he and Olivia had planned to elope, the breathless anticipation, the small bag of possessions he'd packed, the 2 horses he'd secured for their journey. They'd arranged to meet at midnight behind the livery stable, planning to ride to the next county where a justice of the peace would marry them without requiring parental permission. He had waited for hours, growing increasingly concerned as midnight came and went with no sign of Olivia. It wasn't until dawn that he learned Harold Campbell had discovered their plan and locked his daughter away. By nightfall, she was on a train bound east, and Samuel's heart had shattered into pieces he'd spent years trying to reassemble. Now, as he lay in his narrow bed staring at the ceiling, Samuel wondered what tomorrow's meeting would bring, and whether the carefully reconstructed life he'd built was about to be upended once again by the only woman he'd ever truly loved. The following day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Samuel threw himself into the most physically demanding tasks around the ranch, hoping exhaustion might clear his mind of thoughts of Olivia. It didn't work. If anything, the physical labor only seemed to sharpen his memories of her, the softness of her hands against his calloused ones, the scent of lavender that always clung to her hair, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. By late afternoon, he'd given up any pretense of productivity. After cleaning up and changing into his best shirt another detail he tried not to examine too closely, he informed Mr. Douglas that he had business in town and would return later that evening. "Take your time, Samuel," the ranch owner said, a knowing glint in his eye that suggested news of Olivia's return had reached even the isolated ranch house. "Some matters can't be rushed." The sun was beginning its descent as Samuel rode toward town, the familiar landscape bathed in golden light. He took the long way around, avoiding Main Street and instead approaching the Miller cottage from the creek side. The small house came into view as he crested a gentle rise, a simple one-story structure with a covered porch, surrounded by cottonwood trees that rustled in the evening breeze. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as Samuel drew closer, he could see that the windows were illuminated with a warm glow. He dismounted, tethering his horse to a nearby tree, and took a moment to compose himself before approaching the front door. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing Olivia standing in the entryway. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made her look more like the girl he remembered. "You came," she said softly, as if she'd half expected him not to. "I said I would." Samuel removed his hat, suddenly acutely aware of the gulf that 7 years had created between them. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, gesturing him into a small but cozy sitting room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. The furniture was sparse, just a small sofa, a rocking chair, and a table with 2 chairs, but the space was clean and welcoming. "I haven't had time to properly furnish it yet," Olivia explained, noticing his glance around the room, "but it suits my needs." "It's a nice place," Samuel said, still holding his hat awkwardly in his hands. "Private?" "Yes, that's partly why I chose it." She indicated the sofa. "Please sit. Would you like some coffee? I just made a pot." "That would be nice, thank you." While Olivia disappeared into what he presumed was the kitchen, Samuel took the opportunity to observe the few personal touches she'd already added to the space, a small bookshelf filled with volumes he couldn't quite make out from where he sat, a colorful quilt draped over the back of the rocking chair, a vase of wildflowers on the mantel. She returned moments later with 2 steaming cups, handing one to Samuel before taking a seat in the rocking chair across from him. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the gentle creak of Olivia's chair. "I'm not sure where to begin," she finally said, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her cup. "Why did you come back to Oakridge?" Samuel asked, deciding that directness was the only way forward. "After all this time?" Olivia took a sip of her coffee, seeming to gather her thoughts. "It's not a simple answer. I've got time," she nodded, setting her cup down on a small side table. "My father died last winter," she said, her voice steady but tinged with an emotion Samuel couldn't quite identify. "Pneumonia. It was quick, at least." "I'm sorry to hear that," Samuel said, and meant it despite everything. Harold Campbell had been a hard man, but he'd also been Olivia's father. "Thank you." She folded her hands in her lap. "After his death, many things changed. My brothers took over the business in Boston, and I found myself at a crossroads. I'd been teaching at a girls' school for the past 4 years, but without father's oversight, I realized I was free to make my own choices for the first time in my adult life. The implication hung in the air between them that, until Harold Campbell's death, Olivia's life had not been her own to direct. "Your brothers didn't object to your return?" Samuel asked, remembering the 2 burly men who had held him down while their father explained in excruciating detail why a Campbell daughter would never marry a penniless cowhand. A flash of something pain, anger, crossed Olivia's face. My brothers have their own lives now. Neither of them cared where I went, as long as I didn't interfere with their business affairs or make demands on the family fortune. There was a bitterness in her voice that Samuel had never heard before. The Olivia he'd known had adored her older brothers, despite their protective tendencies. "So you chose to come back here?" he prompted when she fell silent. "Yes." She met his gaze directly for the first time since he'd entered the cottage. "I saw the advertisement for a teacher in the Western Educator's Journal. When I realized it was for Oakridge, it felt like a sign, perhaps, or an opportunity to face the past instead of running from it." "And what part of the past did you come back to face, Olivia?" Samuel asked, his voice low and intent. She drew a deep breath. "All of it. The way I left. The things I never got to say." Her voice faltered slightly. "The people I never got to say goodbye to. You mean me?" "Yes, Samuel, I mean you." She stood abruptly, moving to the window that looked out toward the creek. "I owe you an explanation for what happened, why I never wrote, why there was only silence all these years." Samuel set his coffee cup aside, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain she must hear it. "I'm listening." Olivia remained at the window, her back to him, her silhouette outlined against the dimming light outside. "My father intercepted all communication. Any letters I tried to send were confiscated. He hired a companion for me, Mrs. Hargrove, whose real purpose was to ensure I didn't try to contact you or return to Wyoming." She turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of old pain and resolve. "For the first year, I was virtually a prisoner in my aunt's home. I was allowed to attend social functions, but always with Mrs. Hargrove at my side. I was never left alone long enough to post a letter or speak privately with anyone who might help me." Samuel felt a surge of anger at the old man's controlling tactics, even as a part of him felt vindicated to learn that Olivia hadn't simply forgotten him. "I tried to run away twice," she continued, a hint of defiance entering her voice. "The first time, I only made it to the train station before Mrs. Hargrove caught up with me. The second time, I actually boarded a westbound train, but my father had telegraphed ahead, and I was removed at the next station and brought back to Boston." "Jesus, Olivia," Samuel breathed, rising to his feet. "I had no idea. How could you? That was the point, to make sure you never knew, to make sure I had no choice but to eventually give up and accept the life my father had chosen for me." "Did you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "Give up, I mean." Olivia's eyes met his, steady and clear. "I stopped actively fighting, if that's what you're asking. I realized that direct defiance wasn't going to work, so I changed tactics. I convinced my father to allow me to attend teachers' college, arguing that an education would make me more attractive to the kind of suitors he approved of." "And did it make you more attractive to suitors, I mean?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "There were several. Men from good Boston families with business connections to my father. I refused them all, which was my one remaining act of defiance. Father couldn't force me to marry against my will, though he certainly tried to pressure me into accepting various offers." Samuel tried to imagine Olivia in Boston society, courted by wealthy men in fine suits, attending formal dinners and social gatherings so different from the simple life of Oakridge. It hurt to think of her there, surrounded by men who could offer her everything he couldn't. "As the years passed," Olivia continued, "my father's control gradually loosened. I established myself as a teacher, earned my own modest income, developed a reputation for being married to my work. Eventually, Mrs. Hargrove was dismissed, though I was still expected to live under my aunt's roof and account for my whereabouts. She moved away from the window, drawing closer to where Samuel stood. When Father died, everything changed. Suddenly, there was no one dictating my choices, monitoring my correspondence, deciding where I could go and what I could do. "So you came back to Oakridge," Samuel said, still struggling to process everything she was telling him. "Not immediately." Olivia shook her head. "First, I had to decide what I truly wanted without the reflexive defiance that had driven so many of my choices. I had to ask myself whether returning to Wyoming was actually my desire, or merely a final act of rebellion against my father's memory." The honesty of her admission struck Samuel. The Olivia he remembered had been passionate and sometimes impulsive. This woman before him had learned caution and self-reflection. "And what did you decide?" he asked. "That I wanted to see Oakridge again. That I wanted to know if this place, these mountains, this sky still felt like home after all these years." Her voice softened. "That I needed to know what had become of you, Samuel Winters." The directness of her words took his breath away. "And now that you're here, now that you've seen me again." Olivia took another step toward him, close enough now that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could detect the faint scent of lavender that still clung to her after all these years. "Now I know that the years have changed us both," she said quietly. "That the boy and girl who planned to run away together no longer exist in quite the same way. But I also know that seeing you again has awakened something in me that I thought had died long ago." Samuel felt as if the ground were shifting beneath his feet. "Olivia, I'm not asking for anything, Samuel," she interrupted quickly. "I have no right to. 7 years is a lifetime. You've built a life here, established yourself. For all I know, there might be someone there isn't," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. "There hasn't been anyone serious, not since you." A look of surprise crossed her face, followed by something like hope. "Oh." They stood facing each other in the firelit room, the weight of their shared past and all the intervening years hanging between them. Samuel wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and see if she still fit against him the way she once had, but caution held him back. "What happens now?" he asked instead. "I don't know," Olivia admitted. "I came back to Oakridge to teach, to start fresh in a place that once meant everything to me. I didn't expect. I didn't dare hope that you and I might." "Might what?" She shook her head, a rueful smile playing at her lips. "I don't even know. Find some kind of closure. Discover if there's anything left of what we once felt. I only knew I couldn't move forward with my life until I faced the past, until I faced you." Samuel took a deep breath, trying to order his thoughts. "I spent years wondering what happened to you, Olivia. Wondering if you'd forgotten me, if you'd found someone else, if you ever thought about what we might have had together." "I never forgot," she said softly. "Not for a single day." The simple declaration broke something open inside him, a carefully sealed chamber of his heart where he'd locked away all his memories of her, all the pain of losing her. "I need time," he said finally. "This is a lot to take in." Olivia nodded, taking a step back. "Of course, I understand. I've had months to process my feelings, to prepare for seeing you again. You've had less than 2 days. "That doesn't mean I don't," Samuel stopped, uncertain how to express the tumult of emotions coursing through him. "I just need to think." "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll be here." The school term lasts until spring, at least. The mention of her teaching position reminded Samuel of the reality of their situation. Olivia was now Oakridge's school teacher, a position of responsibility and respect in the community. Any relationship between them would be subject to public scrutiny in a way their youthful romance had never been. "Perhaps we could start as friends," Olivia suggested when he remained silent. "Get to know each other again, as the people we are now, not the boy and girl we once were." The suggestion was reasonable, sensible even. Yet a part of Samuel rebelled against the idea of being merely friends with Olivia Campbell. Still, he recognized the wisdom in her words. "Friends," he agreed, extending his hand as if to seal the bargain. Olivia looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before placing her smaller one in it. The contact sent a jolt through Samuel's system, a visceral reminder of the connection that had once existed between them. "Friends," she echoed, her fingers warm against his. Neither of them seemed eager to break the contact, their hands remaining clasped between them as the fire crackled and shadows danced across the walls of the small cottage. In that moment, Samuel knew with absolute certainty that friendship with Olivia Campbell would be the most challenging undertaking of his life and potentially the most rewarding. "I should go," he said reluctantly, finally releasing her hand. "It's getting late and I have an early start tomorrow." Olivia nodded, stepping back. "Thank you for coming, for listening." "Thank you for telling me the truth," Samuel replied. "It means more than you know." She walked him to the door where he paused, hat in hand. "The school term starts next week." "Monday," she confirmed. "I've already met some of the children. There are 26 enrolled, ages 6 to 15. That's quite a range to teach. I'm used to it. The school in Boston where I taught had similar challenges." Samuel placed his hat on his head, adjusting it with a practiced motion. "Perhaps I could ride by the schoolhouse on Monday after classes end. See how your first day went." The smile that illuminated Olivia's face was worth any risk. "I'd like that very much. Until Monday, then. Until Monday." As Samuel rode back to Double Creek under a canopy of stars, his mind was awhirl with everything Olivia had told him. The knowledge that she hadn't abandoned him willingly, that she had fought to return to him, that she had refused other suitors out of loyalty to a relationship that most would have considered long dead, it was almost too much to absorb. And yet, caution tempered his rising hope. 7 years had shaped them both in ways that couldn't be undone. The passionate young lovers they had been no longer existed. In their place stood a successful ranch foreman and an educated schoolteacher, each with responsibilities and reputations to consider. Could they find their way back to each other? Did they even want the same things anymore? Samuel had no answers, only questions and the memory of Olivia's hand in his, still fitting perfectly after all these years. The days until Monday passed in a blur of ranch work and restless nights. Samuel threw himself into his duties with renewed vigor, as if physical exhaustion might bring clarity to his thoughts. By Sunday evening, the hands at Double Creek were exchanging concerned glances as their normally level-headed foreman drove himself and them at a pace that bordered on punishing. "You're going to work those boys into the ground," Mr. Douglas commented as he and Samuel reviewed the next day's tasks in the ranch office. "Or yourself. Neither serves any purpose." Samuel glanced up from the ledger he'd been studying. "Sorry, sir. Just trying to get ahead of things before the cattle drive next month." Douglas leaned back in his chair, regarding Samuel with knowing eyes. "I've been around long enough to recognize when a man's working to avoid thinking. And since this behavior started right around the time Olivia Campbell returned to town, I don't think it takes a genius to make the connection." Samuel sighed, setting down his pencil. There was no point denying it. Theodore Douglas had been more of a father to him than his own had ever been. "It's complicated." "I imagine it is. 7 years is a long time. You knew about us back then," Douglas chuckled. "Son, everyone with eyes knew about you too. The way you looked at each other wasn't exactly subtle. I remember thinking Harold Campbell was fighting a losing battle, trying to keep you apart." "Turns out he won that battle," Samuel said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Did he?" Douglas raised an eyebrow. "From what I hear, Miss Campbell's back in Oakridge, unmarried, and you've been riding into town more in the past 3 days than in the previous 3 months. Doesn't sound like a complete victory to me." Samuel couldn't help but smile at the older man's perspective. "I suppose not, when you put it that way. So what's holding you back? You're not that penniless cowhand anymore. You're foreman of one of the most successful ranches in the territory, with savings in the bank and a reputation for honesty and hard work. If you still care for the girl-woman now, I suppose what's stopping you from courting her properly?" It was a question Samuel had been asking himself for days. "I guess I'm afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that too much has changed, that we want different things now. That she'll realize Oakridge is too small for her after all and leave again." Douglas nodded thoughtfully. "All reasonable concerns, but you know what's worse than taking a chance and getting hurt? What's that? Not taking the chance at all and spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been." The older man rose, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. "Think about it, and for God's sake, ease up on the work pace before the hands start quitting on us." Samuel laughed, promising to do just that. As he returned to his cabin later that night, Douglas's words echoed in his mind. The prospect of watching Olivia leave Oakridge a second time was painful to contemplate, but the thought of never trying to rebuild what they'd once had, of letting fear keep them apart when her father no longer could, seemed even worse. By morning, Samuel had made his decision. He would take things slow, get to know the woman Olivia had become, but he wouldn't let caution paralyze him into inaction. 7 years had been stolen from them. He wouldn't waste another day. Monday dawned clear and cool, a perfect September day. Samuel completed his morning duties with focused efficiency, delegating the afternoon tasks to Diego with instructions that weren't quite as demanding as those of previous days. "Going into town?" Diego asked, a knowing glint in his eye. "School gets out at 3, Samuel confirmed, not bothering to pretend his timing was coincidental. Diego grinned. "About time. The men were starting to take bets on how long before you came to your senses. Is there anything that doesn't become betting fodder around here?" "Not much," Diego admitted cheerfully. "Give Miss Campbell our regards." Samuel shook his head in mock exasperation, but as he rode toward town a couple of hours later, he found himself grateful for the easy acceptance of the men who worked alongside him. Many of them had families in town or in neighboring communities. They understood the pull of the heart better than most. The Oakridge schoolhouse sat on the western edge of town, a simple one-room building with a bell tower and a small yard where children played during their midday break. As Samuel approached, he could hear the rhythmic recitation of multiplication tables floating through the open windows, Olivia's clear voice leading the students through their mathematics lesson. Not wanting to disrupt the class, he dismounted and tethered his horse to a nearby hitching post, then leaned against a tree to wait. Through the window, he caught glimpses of Olivia moving around the classroom, her manner both authoritative and gentle as she guided her pupils through their lessons. The sight stirred something deep within him, not just desire, though that was certainly present, but a profound admiration for the woman she had become. This Olivia, confidently teaching a room full of children ranging from tiny first years to gangly teenagers on the cusp of adulthood, was a far cry from the sheltered merchant's daughter he'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. At precisely 3 o'clock, the school bell rang, and moments later the doors burst open as children spilled out into the yard, their excited voices filling the air. Some headed straight for town, while others lingered to play or chat. A few noticed Samuel and waved, children of ranchers and townspeople who recognized the Double Creek foreman. Olivia appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, bidding farewell to the last stragglers. She wore a simple navy dress with a white collar, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. When she spotted Samuel waiting by the tree, her professional composure briefly gave way to a smile of genuine pleasure. "Mr. Winters," she called, maintaining proper formality in front of the remaining students. "What a nice surprise." Samuel approached, hat in hand. "Miss Campbell, I thought I'd ride by and see how your first day went." "It went very well, thank you." She turned to the last group of children. "Run along now, I'll see you all tomorrow morning." Once the children had dispersed, her demeanor relaxed visibly. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she admitted, her voice softer. "I said I would." Samuel gestured toward the schoolhouse. "May I see inside?" "I haven't been in there since my own school days." Olivia led him into the single large room with its rows of desks facing a blackboard. The space was neat and organized, with maps hanging on the walls and shelves of books along the back wall. A vase of wildflowers sat on Olivia's desk, a welcome touch of color in the otherwise utilitarian space. "You've made it your own already," Samuel observed. "I'm trying to. The previous teacher left things in good order, but I've rearranged a bit to suit my teaching style." She moved to straighten a stack of primers. "The children seem eager to learn, which makes everything easier." "And how do you find being back in Oakridge? Different from teaching in Boston, I imagine." Olivia considered the question. "Different, yes, but not in the ways you might think. Children are children, whether in Boston or Wyoming. They need the same things: guidance, encouragement, clear boundaries." She smiled. "Though I will say the questions are different. In Boston, I never had to explain why it's important to learn poetry when one could be learning to break horses instead." Samuel laughed. "Let me guess, Tommy Jenkins. How did you know?" "Some things never change. His father asked the same questions when we were in school together." They shared a smile of understanding, and for a moment the years between them seemed to dissolve. "Would you?" Samuel hesitated, then pressed on. "Would you like to take a walk? The weather's fine and there's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity sparked in Olivia's eyes. "I'd like that. Just let me gather my things." As she collected her satchel and locked up the schoolhouse, Samuel found himself watching her movements, noting the graceful efficiency with which she moved. The girl he'd known had been full of nervous energy. This woman possessed a centered calm that was new and fascinating. They walked side by side down the path that led away from town and toward the creek, maintaining a proper distance between them that nonetheless felt charged with awareness. Samuel led them along the bank until they reached a bend where a massive cottonwood tree spread its branches over the water. "You remember this place?" he asked, stopping beneath the tree. Olivia's expression softened with recognition. "Of course I do. This is where we used to meet." "This is where I first told you I loved you," Samuel said quietly. "Right here under this tree, I remember." Her voice was barely above a whisper. It was spring. The cottonwood seeds were floating in the air like snow. You were wearing a yellow dress. And you brought me a book of poetry you'd saved up to buy. The shared memory hung between them, vibrant and alive despite the passage of time. Samuel looked down at Olivia, struck anew by the complex emotions she stirred in him: desire and tenderness, nostalgia and hope. "I wanted to bring you here," he said, "because this place represents who we were, but it also made me think about who we are now." Olivia tilted her head, studying his face. "And who are we now, Samuel?" "I'm still figuring that out, but I know one thing for certain." He took a step closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "The boy who stood under this tree 7 years ago loved a girl with his whole heart. The man standing here now feels the same way about the woman she's become." Olivia's breath caught, her eyes widening at his declaration. "Samuel, I'm not asking for promises," he continued quickly. "I know we need time. I know we have to get to know each other again, figure out if what we want now is compatible. But I wanted you to know that my feelings haven't changed, they've grown, evolved, just as we have." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but they were accompanied by a smile that transformed her face. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "Even when I thought I might never see you again, even when reason told me to let go and move on, my heart refused to listen." The admission broke something open inside Samuel, a final barrier of caution that had been holding him back. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached for her hand. When she didn't resist, he gently pulled her closer until barely a breath separated them. "May I kiss you, Olivia Campbell?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Her answer was to rise on her tiptoes, bringing her lips to his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened into something that spoke of 7 years of longing, of dreams deferred but never abandoned. Samuel's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as if he could somehow make up for all the lost time in this single embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Olivia rested her forehead against his chest. "That was not very friend-like," she murmured, a hint of laughter in her voice. Samuel chuckled, his hand coming up to stroke her hair. "No, it wasn't. Are you disappointed?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with happiness. "Not in the slightest." They stood together beneath the cottonwood tree as the afternoon sun filtered through its leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground around them. The creek gurgled peacefully nearby, the same water that had witnessed their first declarations of love now bearing witness to this new beginning. "What happens now?" Olivia asked after a comfortable silence. "Now," Samuel said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "I court you properly. No sneaking around, no hiding from your father. I call on you at your cottage with the whole town knowing my intentions. I take you to church on Sundays and to dinner at the hotel restaurant. The whole town will talk," she pointed out, though she didn't sound particularly concerned. "Let them. I'm not that penniless cowhand anymore, and you're not a sheltered girl being forced into a life you didn't choose. We're adults who know our own minds." Olivia smiled, leaning into his touch. "I like the sound of that, though I should warn you, as the town's schoolteacher, I'm expected to maintain certain standards of behavior." "I'll be the perfect gentleman," Samuel promised, though the glint in his eye suggested he might occasionally fall short of perfection. "In public, at least." His words brought a becoming blush to Olivia's cheeks, reminding him of how innocent their relationship had once been, despite the passion that had flared between them. They had been so young, so naive in many ways. Now they approached each other with the wisdom of experience, the patience of maturity, and the deeper understanding that comes from having lived through separation and loss. "We should head back," Olivia said reluctantly, glancing at the lowering sun. "People will wonder where I've gone." Samuel nodded, though he was loath to leave this private moment behind. "May I call on you tomorrow evening? Perhaps bring dinner. I'd like that very much." She straightened her dress and smoothed her hair, returning to the composed schoolteacher that the town knew. But her eyes, when they met his, still held the warmth and promise of the kiss they'd shared. As they walked back toward town, maintaining a proper distance but with hearts beating in newly rediscovered harmony, Samuel felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The path ahead might not be without obstacles, the gossip of a small town, the adjustments of two independent lives merging, the shadow of past pain, but for the first time in 7 years, the future stretched before him bright with possibility. Olivia Campbell had returned to Oakridge, and with her return, Samuel Winters had found the missing piece of himself he'd stopped hoping to recover. Whatever came next, they would face it together, older, wiser, but no less in love than they had been under the cottonwood tree all those years ago. The following weeks saw Samuel and Olivia settling into a courtship that quickly became the talk of Oakridge. True to his word, Samuel called on her regularly, taking her to dinner at the hotel restaurant on Saturday evenings and escorting her to church on Sundays. They were careful to maintain propriety. Olivia's position as schoolteacher demanded it, but there was no hiding the obvious affection between them. "Never seen a man so besotted," Diego remarked one evening as Samuel prepared to ride into town for dinner with Olivia. "You practically float around the ranch these days." Samuel couldn't deny it. After years of measured contentment, the joy he felt in Olivia's presence was almost overwhelming. Each moment with her revealed new facets of the woman she had become: her patience with struggling students, her dry wit that occasionally surprised him into laughter, her fierce independence born of years fighting for autonomy. For her part, Olivia seemed equally captivated by the man Samuel had grown into. "You're steadier now," she told him one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Not that you weren't reliable before, but there's a confidence about you that's new." "Responsibility will do that," he replied. "When men's livelihoods depend on your decisions, you learn to trust your judgment." October brought the cattle drive, taking Samuel away from Oakridge for nearly 2 weeks. The separation, though brief, underscored for both of them how quickly they had become integral to each other's lives again. When he returned, dusty and exhausted but successful, Olivia was waiting at her cottage with a hot meal and a welcome that left no doubt of how much she'd missed him. As autumn deepened toward winter, their relationship grew alongside the changing season. They spoke of the past, the pain of separation, the lives they'd built in the intervening years, but increasingly, their conversations turned toward the future. "Mr. Douglas has offered me partnership in the ranch," Samuel told Olivia one snowy evening in early December as they sat before the fire in her cottage. "He has no children, and he's looking toward retirement in the next few years." Olivia's eyes widened. "Samuel, that's wonderful. You've worked so hard for this." "It means I'd eventually take over management of Double Creek entirely," he continued, watching her face carefully. "It's a big responsibility, but it's everything I've worked for." "I'm so proud of you," she said, her expression warm with genuine happiness for him. Double Creek couldn't be in better hands. Samuel took a deep breath, gathering his courage for what he wanted to say next. "There's a house on the property, the old foreman's house that Douglas had built when he first bought the ranch. It's been empty for years, ever since he built the main house. It needs work, but it's solid. 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a porch that wraps around the front." Olivia grew very still, her eyes never leaving his face. "It sounds lovely." "It could be," Samuel agreed. "With the right touch, a woman's touch, perhaps." The implication hung between them, clear but unspoken. Since rekindling their relationship, they had been careful not to rush, both aware of how much was at stake. "Samuel," Olivia said softly, "are you asking me something?" He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking if you can see yourself there, with me, as my wife." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Are you proposing to me, Samuel Winters?" "I am." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He opened the box to reveal a ring not ostentatious, but beautiful in its simplicity. A single pearl set in gold, with small diamonds on either side. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value she left me when she died. I've kept it all these years, knowing that someday, if I was very lucky, I might have the chance to give it to you." Olivia's tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks. "Oh, Samuel." Olivia Campbell, I've loved you since we were hardly more than children. I loved you through 7 years of separation. I love the woman you've become even more than the girl you were." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you make a life with me at Double Creek?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Samuel, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it seemed to belong as if made for her. Then he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their shared future. When they finally broke apart, Olivia asked, "What about my teaching position?" "The school term doesn't end until spring." "I wouldn't ask you to give it up," Samuel assured her. "Double Creek isn't so far that you couldn't still teach, at least until the end of the term. After that, well, we can decide together what makes the most sense." The consideration touched her deeply. "Thank you for understanding how important my work is to me." "It's part of who you are," he said simply, "and I love who you are." They spent the evening planning their future, a wedding in the spring, after the school term ended, renovations to the old foreman's house to make it their home, the life they would build together at Double Creek. When Samuel finally took his leave, the night having grown late, it was with the knowledge that the dreams they'd shared as youths were finally within reach. News of their engagement spread quickly through Oakridge. Most townspeople responded with delight. The romance of it captured many hearts, especially among those who remembered the young couple from years before. Even Sarah Jacobs, who had harbored feelings for Samuel, offered sincere congratulations when Olivia stopped by the store. "He never looked at anyone the way he looks at you," she told Olivia with wistful honesty. "Even when we all thought you were never coming back." Christmas arrived, bringing with it a festive spirit that seemed to mirror the joy Samuel and Olivia found in each other. They attended the town's Christmas social together, danced under paper decorations in the community hall, and exchanged gifts beside the tree in Olivia's cottage, books for her, a finely crafted saddle for him, symbols of how well they understood each other's hearts. As the new year of 1886 dawned, they began work on the house at Double Creek. Theodore Douglas insisted on contributing to the renovations as an engagement present, allowing them to make more extensive improvements than Samuel had initially planned. "It's going to be beautiful," Olivia declared as they stood in what would become their parlor, the winter sunlight streaming through freshly washed windows. "I can already see us here, building a life together." Samuel pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by the reality that their long-deferred dreams were finally taking shape. "I can see it too, and it's more wonderful than anything I imagined during those years without you." The months passed in a blur of preparation for the wedding, for the completion of their home, for the life they would share. As promised, Olivia continued teaching, earning the respect and affection of her students and their parents. Samuel divided his time between ranch duties and house renovations, often working late into the evening to ensure everything would be ready by spring. April brought the end of the school term, and with it, final preparations for their wedding. The ceremony was set for the first Saturday in May, to be held in the small church in Oakridge where both had attended services as children. The night before the wedding, Samuel rode to Olivia's cottage for a final visit before they would next see each other at the altar. They sat on her porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Nervous?" Samuel asked, noticing how Olivia's fingers fidgeted with the trim of her shawl. "A little," she admitted. "Not about marrying you, never that, just, it feels almost unreal, doesn't it? After everything that kept us apart, to be here on the eve of our wedding." Samuel understood exactly what she meant. There had been moments throughout their courtship when he'd been seized by the irrational fear that something would happen to separate them again, that Harold Campbell would somehow reach from beyond the grave, to tear Olivia away, or that she would realize Oakridge was too small after all and long for the cultural advantages of Boston. "I keep expecting to wake up," he confessed, "to find this has all been a dream and you're still back east, beyond my reach." Olivia took his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "This is real, Samuel. I'm here, and tomorrow I'll be your wife. Nothing will separate us again." "Nothing," he agreed, bringing her hand to his lips. "Not distance, not time, not even your father's ghost." She smiled at that, though there was a touch of sadness in it. "I've made my peace with father's memory. He thought he was doing what was best for me in his own way. He was wrong, but I've forgiven him for it." The generosity of spirit behind her words reminded Samuel yet again of the remarkable woman Olivia had become. "You amaze me," he told her, "every day in new ways." "As you do me," she replied softly. "I'm so proud of the man you are, Samuel." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool, talking of the future that would begin tomorrow, the children they hoped to have, the life they would build at Double Creek, the decades they would spend together making up for the years that had been stolen from them. When Samuel finally rose to leave, it was with reluctance tempered by the knowledge that the next time he saw Olivia, it would be as she walked toward him down the church aisle. "Until tomorrow, my love," he said, kissing her one last time. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, her eyes bright with promise. "When forever begins." Dawn broke clear and beautiful on their wedding day, as if even the weather wished to celebrate their union. Samuel dressed with care in the new suit he'd ordered from Denver, his hands only slightly unsteady as he fastened the buttons and adjusted his tie. "Nervous?" Mr. Douglas asked as he entered the room where Samuel was preparing, a bottle of fine whiskey in his hand. Traditional for the groom to have a small drink to steady his nerves. Samuel accepted the offered glass with a smile. "Not nervous about marrying Olivia, just want everything to be perfect for her." "It will be," Douglas assured him, raising his own glass. "To you and Miss Campbell. May your union be blessed with all the happiness you both deserve." They drank the toast, the whiskey burning pleasantly down Samuel's throat. As he set down his empty glass, a feeling of profound rightness settled over him. After 7 years of separation, of building separate lives, of growing into the people they were meant to be, he and Olivia were finally about to begin their life together. The church was filled to capacity when Samuel took his place at the altar an hour later. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the union of their schoolteacher and the Double Creek foreman, a love story that had captured Oakridge's collective imagination. When the doors opened and Olivia appeared on the arm of Mayor Donovan, who had agreed to give her away in the absence of her father, Samuel felt his breath catch in his throat. She wore a gown of ivory satin, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls beneath a veil that did little to hide the radiance of her smile as their eyes met across the church. Each step she took toward him seemed to erase a day of their separation, until finally she stood beside him, their hands joining as naturally as if they had never been apart. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Samuel hardly heard the familiar words. His world had narrowed to Olivia's face, to the love shining in her eyes, to the pressure of her fingers against his. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices steady with conviction. The rings they exchanged, Samuel's a simple gold band. Olivia's design to complement her engagement ring symbolized not just their future together, but the circular journey that had brought them back to each other after so many years apart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared at last. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Samuel kissed his bride to the applause and cheers of their friends and neighbors, He felt a sense of completion that had eluded him for 7 long years. Olivia was his wife, his partner, his future, and he was hers, now and forever. The celebration that followed at the Oakridge Hotel was joyous and lively, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. When they finally departed for their new home at Double Creek, riding in a buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ranch hands, Samuel and Olivia were exhausted but blissfully happy. "Welcome home, Mrs. Winters," Samuel said as he carried her across the threshold of the house they had spent months preparing, their house, their home, the foundation of their future together. Olivia looked around at the parlor, now furnished with a mix of pieces from her cottage and items they had selected together, her eyes bright with emotion. "It's perfect, Samuel. Everything I ever dreamed of." As they stood in the center of their home, arms around each other, Samuel marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From love-struck youths defying Olivia's father, to strangers separated by distance and circumstance, to adults who had found their way back to each other through perseverance, and an enduring love that had survived 7 years of separation. "I love you, Olivia Winters," he whispered, his lips brushing against her temple. She turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his, her expression one of perfect happiness. "And I love you, Samuel Winters, today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." Their kiss sealed the promise, a beginning rather than an ending, the first moment of the lifetime they would share together at Double Creek Ranch. 5 years later, Samuel stood on the porch of their home, watching as Olivia moved through the garden with their 3-year-old daughter, Grace. The little girl's auburn curls so like her mother's bounced as she carefully deposited seeds into the furrows Olivia had prepared, her small face serious with concentration. From inside the house came the sound of their infant son, James, beginning to stir from his nap. Samuel went to him, lifting the boy from his cradle and carrying him outside to join his mother and sister. "Look who's awake," he called, and Olivia turned with a smile that still had the power to take his breath away. "There's my boy," she said, crossing to take James from his father's arms. "Did you have a good sleep?" As Samuel watched his wife with their children, he reflected on the life they had built together at Double Creek. Theodore Douglas had retired fully 2 years earlier, leaving Samuel as the sole owner of the ranch. Under his management, it had prospered beyond anyone's expectations, allowing them to build the comfortable life they now enjoyed. Olivia had continued teaching until Grace was born, then had reluctantly stepped away from the classroom to focus on motherhood. But her passion for education hadn't diminished. She regularly tutored children from neighboring ranches who couldn't attend the town school, and she had plans to return to teaching when James was a bit older. "Papa, look," Grace called, holding up dirt-covered hands. "I planted carrots." "You did a fine job, sweetheart," Samuel praised, crouching down to her level. "They'll grow big and strong with your help." As the afternoon sun cast golden light across their property, Samuel felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become a daily part of his life. The years of separation, painful as they had been, had shaped both him and Olivia in ways that made their eventual reunion all the more meaningful. They had returned to each other as whole individuals, ready to build a partnership based on mutual respect and a love that had withstood the ultimate test. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked, coming to stand beside him while Grace continued her gardening and James dozed against his mother's shoulder. Samuel slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Just how lucky I am, how perfect our life is." "Not perfect," Olivia corrected with a smile. "Real. With all the challenges and joys that come with it." He chuckled, acknowledging the truth in her words. They had faced their share of difficulties, a difficult pregnancy with James, a drought that had threatened the ranch 2 summers ago, the occasional disagreements that were inevitable in any marriage. But they had faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. "Real, then," he agreed, "and more wonderful than anything I could have imagined that day when you stepped off the train and back into my life." Olivia leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder in a gesture of contentment that had become beautifully familiar over the years. "I sometimes think about what might have happened if Father hadn't sent me away," she mused. "We might have married as children, really, without truly knowing ourselves or what we wanted from life. Do you regret it? The years apart?" She considered the question carefully, as was her way. "I regret the pain it caused us both, but I don't regret the people we became during that time. The people who found each other again and built this life together." Samuel pressed a kiss to her temple, once again struck by the wisdom that was such an integral part of the woman he loved. "I feel the same way, though I would have spared us both the heartache if I could have." "Of course you would have," Olivia said with a soft laugh. "Always my protector, even when what needed protecting was my own chance to grow into myself." Grace came running over then, her gardening apparently complete, demanding to be lifted onto her father's shoulders. As Samuel hoisted her up, her delighted giggles filling the air, he met Olivia's eyes over their daughter's dangling legs. The love he saw there, deep, abiding, tempered by experience but no less powerful for it, was the culmination of a journey that had begun 17 years ago, when a young cowhand had fallen hopelessly in love with a merchant's daughter under a cottonwood tree by the creek. 7 years of separation had tested that love, forced it to evolve from youthful passion into something more enduring. And now, 5 years into their marriage, with 2 beautiful children and a thriving ranch, Samuel and Olivia Winters had built the life they had once only dreamed of, a life rich with love, purpose, and the deep contentment that comes from finding one's way home after a long journey apart. As the sun began to set over Double Creek Ranch, casting long shadows across the land that was their legacy, Samuel silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Olivia Campbell back to Oakridge that day in 1885, and back to him, where she had always belonged.